She was 17 years old when everything collapsed around her. And what happened inside that small Florida trailer still haunts every detective who touched the case, every reporter who chased the story, and every person who believes the truth was never fully uncovered. It was the night 5-year-old Haleigh disappeared from her bed without a sound. The night the country froze, searching for a little girl who never came home. And it was the night Misty Croslin became the last person to ever see her alive. What followed wasn't just an investigation. It was a tightening grip that pulled Misty into a world she was never prepared for. Her story shifted. Her details changed. The timeline cracked in ways that made seasoned investigators stop and stare. They believed she knew more than she ever said, but they could never prove it. So the system found another way: a drug charge. A sentence so heavy it stunned even people inside the courtroom. 25 years. Not for kidnapping, not for murder, but for pills worth less than a used car. And that wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Inside Lowell Correctional Institution, Misty didn't just face punishment. She faced a place long accused of corruption, retaliation, and psychological torment. A place where speaking out means disappearing into isolation. A place where fear becomes routine, and hope becomes a memory. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Misty's case continues to divide the public, why her sentence raised questions that still echo today, and why the disappearance of a single child remains one of Florida's darkest mysteries. To understand where Misty Croslin stands today, we have to go back to that one night that changed everything. February 9th, 2009. A damp, cold evening in Satsuma, Florida. A town where the nights are quiet, the woods are thick, and nothing ever seemed dangerous until that moment. Misty was barely 17 at the time, still a teenager living in a mobile home with her boyfriend, Lowell Cummings, and his 2 young children. She hadn't made it past the 6th grade. She struggled to read, struggled to write, and carried the weight of a childhood marked by fear and trauma. By all accounts, her world had never been stable. But that night would fracture it permanently. Ronald was working an overnight shift, so Misty was responsible for the children. She put 5-year-old Haleigh and her little brother to bed around 8 o'clock. Ronald called throughout the night to check on things. Nothing seemed unusual. The house was still, the kids were sleeping, and Misty told him everything was fine. But when Ronald returned home sometime after 3 a.m., the quiet broke. Haleigh wasn't in her bed. The back door was propped open with a cinder block. It was a scene that didn't make sense, one that looked wrong from the start. What followed was a national panic. Amber alerts blasted across Florida. Search teams combed through swamps, ditches, woods, riverbanks. Helicopters circled the rural area for days. News cameras set up outside the property. And in the middle of the media explosion stood Misty, frightened, trembling, and the last person known to have seen Haleigh alive. Detectives questioned her again and again. They asked the same questions repeatedly, waiting for cracks to show. And they did. Her story shifted. Time frames didn't align. The more she tried to explain, the deeper the suspicions grew. Captain Dominic Piscitello, one of the lead investigators, would later say that a child disappeared under Misty's care and she never gave them the full truth. Haleigh was never found. 16 years later, she remains one of Florida's unsolved Amber Alert cases. Without a body, without solid evidence, law enforcement never filed charges related to the disappearance. And yet, they never stopped looking at Misty. Just a month after Haleigh vanished, Misty and Ronald got married. She was still 17, so she needed parental permission. Ronald told reporters he believed Haleigh would have wanted it. The wedding lasted half a year. The investigation, the pressure, the non-stop coverage eventually tore them apart. Ronald filed for divorce, saying the stress surrounding the case was unbearable. But investigators weren't done with Misty. If they couldn't connect her to Haleigh's disappearance, they looked for the next thing that would give them leverage. In January 2010, almost a year after Haleigh went missing, undercover detectives carried out a detailed drug sting. A woman Misty trusted, Donna Brock, approached her asking if she could help sell some prescription oxycodone. Brock claimed she had legal medication she wanted to get rid of. The buyer, an older man with chronic back pain, was actually an undercover narcotics officer. They arranged small meetings, mostly in parking lots and truck stops. The exchanges were recorded. Each time, only a handful of pills were traded for small amounts of cash. Altogether, the total street value was around $3,000. On January 20, 2010, the arrests began. Misty Croslin, Ronald Cummings, Misty's brother Tommy, and 2 others were taken into custody on drug trafficking charges. The timing was deliberate. Misty had just turned 18. Officers waited specifically until she could be legally charged as an adult. 2 counties, St. John's and Putnam, coordinated their efforts, maximizing the potential penalties. Misty's attorney, Robert Fields, said the evidence against her was overwhelming. Videos, audio recordings, surveillance, it was airtight. He told her to plead no contest, assuring her that under Florida's Youthful Offender Act, she would likely receive no more than 6 years. But that is not what happened. In October 2010, at the St. Johns County Courthouse, the room was filled. Haleigh's family sat in the front rows. Crystal Sheffield, Haleigh's mother, spoke directly to the judge. She said she believed Misty knew what happened to her daughter. She said there were no answers, only pain. Teresa Nevis, Haleigh's grandmother, could barely hold back tears as she said she wanted justice for Haleigh and still believed Misty had the key to the truth. Misty's father begged the court for mercy. He said Misty had never been a drug dealer and wasn't someone who knew how to survive on her own. He said she had been taken advantage of, manipulated, and was still just a child. During the hearing, Misty shared parts of her own past, parts she had never said publicly. She said she had been raped between the ages of 7 and 14 by 2 different people. She said that although Ronald had been rough with her, living with him still felt better than the life she had before. Fields argued she had been set up, that the entire sting operation was built on pressure to extract information about Haleigh. Prosecutors denied this, insisting that the drug charges were separate. Judge Wendy Berger listened quietly. Then she delivered a sentence that stunned the courtroom. 25 years. Mandatory drug rehabilitation. No youthful offender option. No leniency. Just 2 months later, in January 2011, Misty received another 25-year sentence from Putnam County for additional trafficking charges. More fines. More probation. The sentences were concurrent, meaning she would not serve 50 years, but the 25-year total remained. With credit for good behavior, her projected release date is June 10, 2031. Ronald received 15 years. Tommy received 15. Others involved also received far shorter sentences. Misty, the youngest, the least educated, the most emotionally vulnerable, received the harshest fate. And she was sent to a place known for making that fate far worse than the courtroom ever could. Lowell Correctional Institution in Ocala, Florida, is not a typical prison. It is the largest women's prison in the United States, a sprawling facility that opened in 1956 and now houses more than 2,300 inmates. Over the decades, it has developed a reputation so dark that former prisoners still struggle to speak about it. Allegations of brutality, corruption, and sexual abuse stretch back years. In December 2020, after years of interviews and investigations, the U.S. Department of Justice released a blistering report. Their findings were shocking, even for people familiar with prison conditions. The DOJ concluded that sexual abuse by correctional staff at Lowell was severe, pervasive, and systemic. They examined 161 allegations of sexual misconduct by staff between 2015 and 2019. Only 8 resulted in arrests. Dozens of officers resigned during investigations or were terminated for lying, covering up evidence, or violating policies. The report documented patterns, unwanted touching, coerced sexual acts, threats, manipulation. Women who reported abuse were often placed into confinement, while the allegations were investigated. Confinement meant losing their prison jobs, their classes, their programs, their small privileges. It meant being cut off from everyone. Many women retracted their accusations just to escape solitary. Former inmates have described Lowell as a nightmare, an environment where the threat of violence is constant, where retaliation is normalized, where officers allegedly treat inmates as disposable. Even after the DOJ investigation, women reported ongoing abuse. This is where Misty Croslin has spent nearly 15 years of her life in letters shared by supporters. Misty describes a daily routine built around survival. She works, she sleeps, she avoids attention. She says the conditions are deteriorating. Supplies are minimal. Food is often spoiled or insufficient. Basic necessities, including hygiene items, aren't consistently available. The sense of hopelessness is constant. She lost her mother while incarcerated. She said she felt like the world was moving without her. She tried earning her GED, spending months studying, but was removed from the program because she had too much time left on her sentence. The message was clear. Rehabilitation was for people who were expected to leave sooner. According to Dr. Gary Bicart, a forensic psychologist who has researched long-term incarceration, extended sentences in high-security environments create a unique form of psychological deterioration. He describes it as a slow, grinding erosion of identity. Time becomes both the weapon and the wound. The longer someone remains in a facility where fear is constant, the more their sense of self dissolves. Paul Marrero, a retired NYPD inspector and consultant on correctional conditions, said prisons like Lowell are built for control, not growth, not healing, not rehabilitation. Every interaction carries risk. Every day requires vigilance. In women's facilities, where oversight is often weaker and resources are fewer, the danger increases. People become isolated, anxious, hyper-aware. The trauma compounds. Cameron Lindsay, a former warden and prison consultant, said that women's prisons historically have received less funding, less supervision, and fewer mental health resources than men's facilities. The consequences of this imbalance show up in cases like Misty's, where someone already traumatized enters an environment that exacerbates the damage. This leads to the question at the heart of this entire story. Why is Misty Croslin's prison life often described as worse than death? It comes down to three things: time, control, and psychological erosion. Misty was 18 when she was sentenced. She is now 33. Nearly 15 years have passed behind razor wire, locked doors, and the constant tension of Lowell. She has at least 6 more years to go. By the time she is released, she will be 39. Her entire young adulthood will have been consumed within one of the most abusive correctional systems in America. There is no privacy inside. Wake up at this time. Eat at this time. Work assigned shifts. Shower when instructed. Move when told. Stop when told. Every moment is dictated by someone else. Over years, that strips away autonomy, identity, confidence, and hope. Chris McDonough, a retired investigator with the Cold Case Foundation, said death is instantaneous, but life in a place like Lowell is a slow extraction of humanity. The Department of Justice found that staff used fear and intimidation to maintain control. Women learned quickly that reporting abuse didn't bring justice, it brought retribution. Hours in confinement turned into days. Days turned into weeks, and the fear settled into their bodies. For Misty, who endured sexual abuse as a child, who entered prison barely literate and totally unprepared for the realities of incarceration, Lowell became a continuation of the trauma she was born into. There is no safe place. There is no sense of security. Trauma becomes routine. Former prison minister Keith Rover said the emotional weight of years spent in such a facility is almost impossible to describe to someone on the outside. The constant alertness, the lack of peace, the pressure of simply existing, all create a psychological burden that permanently alters the mind. But the emotional destruction isn't limited to the prison walls. The longer someone is isolated from the outside world, the more they lose any real connection to life beyond the fences. Time blurs. Days are indistinguishable. Opportunities disappear. Families drift away. And the realization grows that life has moved on without you. And yet, Misty's name remains tied to the one question that has hovered over this case since 2009. What does she know about Haleigh Cummings? Investigators still believe she holds crucial information. They point to her inconsistent statements, the contradictions, the timeline issues. In 2011, from prison, Misty gave an interview where she described the night again, but her details didn't match previous versions. She said she woke up to the kitchen light on, assumed Ronald had returned home, checked the house, tried calling him repeatedly, realized he wasn't there, and then found Haleigh missing. Her brother Tommy later said that their cousin Joe Overstreet had gone to the house looking for a machine gun and not finding it, took Haleigh instead. He claimed they went to the St. John's River and Overstreet threw the child into the water. Overstreet has denied all involvement and has never been charged. Crystal Sheffield has always believed Misty knows more than she ever revealed. During sentencing, she looked at Misty and asked why she would do this if she claimed to love the children. She said God would give her answers one day. Captain Piscitello said before retirement that somewhere in Misty's changing stories, there is a key that was never used, a truth she never spoke. And here lies the central contradiction. Misty Croslin was never charged with anything related to Haleigh's disappearance. Legally, she is not guilty of that crime. Her 25-year sentence is solely for trafficking pills worth around $3,000. Yet the shadow of Haleigh's disappearance follows every part of Misty's life. The judge's decision to reject the youthful offender option, the maximum sentence, the public perception that this punishment was, in some way, connected to the Unsolved case. Supporters argue Misty was targeted, manipulated, set up, and handed a sentence that made no sense for someone her age, background, and circumstances. They say the system used the drug charges as a workaround when prosecutors couldn't prove involvement in Haleigh's disappearance. Critics argue the opposite, that her inconsistent statements show a pattern of deception, and that even if she cannot be convicted in court, she still carries answers she never gave. But stepping back, Misty's case reveals something far bigger. The collision of trauma, poverty, lack of education, and a justice system that often works differently when public pressure is involved. It shows how a facility like Lowell can turn a prison sentence into something far closer to psychological destruction. Whether Misty Croslin is guilty of knowing what happened to Haleigh or simply the easiest person to target in an impossible situation, her existence inside Lowell Correctional Institution is a daily reminder that punishment can extend far beyond what a judge orders. So why is Misty Croslin's life in Lowell Correctional Institution considered worse than death? Because death is a release, a final moment that ends everything. What Misty faces is not an ending. It is a relentless, unchanging cycle of monotony and fear. Wake up, work, eat food that is barely sufficient, navigate a world where abuse is normalized, and reporting it can result in solitary confinement or punishment. Lie down in a cell with no privacy, no safety, no sense of peace. Watch years slip away without meaningful rehabilitation, without education, without hope for a future beyond those walls. Repeat for decades. The same concrete hallways, the same metal doors, the same rigid schedule that strips away independence, dignity, and identity piece by piece. Every sound echoes through the building, reminding her that no part of this existence is truly her own, that no action goes unnoticed, and that even her thoughts are not free. Every passing day takes her further from the teenager who first stepped into Lowell and closer to a version of herself she may never recognize. And through it all, the lingering shadow of Haleigh Cummings. The unanswered questions, the suspicion from investigators, the judgment from the public that she knows more than she admits, that somehow her suffering is deserved. This is her reality. Unyielding, repetitive, and psychologically consuming. There is no escape, only time. Misty Croslin's scheduled release is June 10, 2031. By then, she will have spent 21 years behind bars for selling roughly $3,000 worth of prescription pills. Haleigh Cummings would be 21 years old today. She remains missing. Her case remains unresolved. A $15,000 reward still stands for any information leading to answers. What is your view? Is Misty's sentence a measure of justice or something far darker? Does the daily grind of life inside Lowell truly constitute a fate worse than death? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this video compelling, hit the like button and subscribe to Court of Secrets for more detailed explorations of true crime stories that reveal the hidden complexities of our justice system. In the next episode, we will follow Ronald Cummings after his release and examine the events leading to his subsequent rearrest. Until then, remember that behind every headline, there is a human story far more layered and complicated than it first appears.